which side are you on?
We want to begin this morning, though, with a recognition of our ancestors and this land.
Sego, Aguigo, Patricia Tano, Ikokpeshni, Ichui, Yon Yats. Good morning, everybody. My name is Patricia, and we want to begin by recognizing that we're in Ohlone territory and that this is the sacred land of the Ohlone people. And so we send love and gratitude to the ancestors of this space and also to the Ohlone people living now who have shared their space with us. We are grateful for the opportunity to be welcomed as settlers into a space that has had a vibrant life and community for thousands and thousands of years, since time immemorial. And we also want to send love and gratitude to all of our relatives, the non-human relatives, all of these trees and plants and animals who live under the pressure of the toxins that are poured into this land all the time. And so we send them love and gratitude for maintaining as much beauty as they can. And we send love and gratitude to the relatives, the human relatives who live here and who live in sacrifice zones all over the world, who are on the front lines of the late stage capitalism and its impacts on us as a community. And so we begin with gratitude and love and courage, because as we move through this moment in history, like those who came before us, it will require courage and strength and compassion. And so we welcome all of those things today as we share this time together.
Welcome. Before I speak, one of our members who we share with Veterans for Peace is going to read a brief poem that he wrote.
Oh, wonderful, Fred. Good morning.
Sorry, you can say your name. I forgot to say your name.
My name is Fred Norman. I'm with Tri-Valley Cares and Veterans for Peace, and I have an infamous distinction of actually being a navigator bombardier whose job it was to drop these horrible devices, something I'm ashamed of. This is called Nagasaki Days. Every night I ask myself, what did I do today to eliminate nuclear weapons? If any night the answer back is nothing, then once again I revisit history. A face melts, eyes evaporate, skin slumps, slews, bones bleach white in smoking flesh, the living disappear, dead before death. Yesterday, a flash of supernova light, a roar of silence. Today, responsibility. Tomorrow, I cannot face tomorrow unless today I act to rectify the past.
Oh. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to read you a short quote that I believe is on your mind and your heart as it is on mine. This is our president, an unstable man, speaking from his New Jersey golf club, threatening North Korea with, quote, fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before. My job today is to talk a little bit about why we are here, and I start with that. We are here today to commemorate the attack with nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and on Nagasaki, today being Nagasaki Day. We are here to stand with the survivors of that attack. We are here to mourn and commemorate the victims. But we are also here to speak truth to power at this place on this day. We are here to stop the next nuclear war before it starts, my friends. And we are here at this location because we understand if we are going to rid the world of the threat of nuclear war and even the likelihood at some point of nuclear war and the potential annihilation of life, we know the only way to address that threat is the total abolition of nuclear weapons. There are no right hands for wrong weapons. We are here today to take a step toward the global elimination of nuclear weapons. Thank you for being here, my friends. I want to say a couple of words about this ground on which we stand, this fence that we stand right next to, and what's going on inside the fence. Right now, and I mean now, today, U.S. weaponeers at Livermore Lab are busy designing a new warhead for a new long-range standoff weapon. Let me just say a couple sentences about what is a long-range standoff nuclear weapon. It is intended to be radar evading. It is intended to be able to be launched from thousands of miles from the target. It is intended to be a sneak nuclear attack, detonating on an unsuspecting population. And you want to hear, in light of what Trump said yesterday, what the Pentagon says, why they want this new weapon? It is to give a future United States president every option to use any kind of a nuclear weapon in a conflict situation. We are here to stop the development of the new warhead for the long-range standoff nuclear weapon. And by the way, these are Mach W80-4, which is the name of the warhead they're designing right now at Livermore. You are here with your presence, with your energy, with your spirit, with your bodies to say no to this. Livermore Lab right now this year is spending more than $1 billion on nuclear weapons activities. That budget is slated to actually go up next year. And if you have a moment and can carry a piece of paper with you, this is Livermore Lab's budget request for next year. I'll just tell you the blue is nuclear weapons activities, and the tiny slivers you can see is everything else, including non-proliferation, including a tiny sliver for actual science. We're here to change this completely. Thank you for being here today to be part of doing that. I want to pivot very briefly to something positive. We're here at a historical juncture where there is escalating nuclear danger, but there is also escalating pressure for global nuclear disarmament. Earlier this year, I was at the United Nations, as were some of the members of other groups here, at the negotiations on a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. On July 7th of this year, that treaty was adopted. You want to hear the vote? 122 nations for, 1 abstention, 1 against. The overwhelming number of nations in the world say nuclear weapons are unacceptable, they are now illegal, and we must work toward their actual physical dismantlement and elimination. We will deliver this treaty, all 10 pages, to the lab. You can read it on the laboratory gates where it will be hung. We asked the lab director to meet us at the gates today. And the lab director replied, and I honestly appreciate that he responded. He replied that we should take our discussion to talk to the U.S. representatives at the UN, period. And I'm going to read 2 sentences because I'm over time, but I want to read 2 sentences from our response to his reply. Here's what we wrote. We wrote that we do talk to our representatives at the United Nations and we will continue to do so. But Livermore Lab is a proper and necessary forum to discuss nuclear disarmament in general and the implications of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in particular. Indeed, nuclear weapons activities that Livermore Lab conducts at its main site here in Livermore and at its Site 300 high explosives testing range near Tracy make it not merely an appropriate location, but an imperative location to have this discussion. With your bodies, you are forcing this discussion today. From the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Leah. We really appreciate Mayor Leah and her consistency, her focus, her intensity. It's what we all need. Let's take a moment in order to focus ourselves for this work. We want to commemorate the terrible dropping of the bomb. Let's take a moment of silence in order to focus and get deep in our intensity within ourselves. Let's take a moment. Good people, we have the honor this morning to hear from a survivor. Takashi Tanimori is a survivor of the 1945 atomic bombing of Hiroshima, which happened when he was 8 years old. Tanimori-san is a renowned artist, a writer, and a poet. His experience of losing both parents, 2 siblings, his eyesight, and overcoming hate is documented in Hiroshima Bridge to Forgiveness.
Thank you so much. And today, I see the sign behind me. We are marching for abolition of nuclear bomb. No nuke. Now, I'll be more than happy to share from my own personal experience of Hiroshima to tell you how we could abolish the nuclear bomb. And once for all, we are able to do it. And the next 10 minutes or so, I'd like to share with you that how we could abolish the nuclear bomb to create shifting the world toward peace. Now, I just want to talk from my heart. It's not so much how terrible, horrific event took place on August 6, 1945. But I just want to share with you the process which I came to, I came to find out how we could abolish the nuclear bomb. Since I buried my father's on September 3rd, 1945, just before he was taken from me, my father said, Takashi, I taught you many things, the code of samurai, how to live by. But I also live my life before you. Takashi, would you please promise to your own heart that you will teach your children the things I taught you? And I want you to live your life before the children as I lived. It was when I was 8 years old, and he said, one last thing I'm going to ask you. Takashi, you know the greatest way to avenge your enemy is to learn to forgive. My father never repeated twice anything he had said to us. But this time he said, Takashi, may I repeat, the greatest way to avenge your enemy is to learn to forgive. And that was the last words he left to this number one son, Tanemori. Since then, it took 40 long years of my struggles. And I was like many of you, an anti-nuclear, anti-nuclear. And we think if we abolish the nuclear bomb from the world, like mayor of the Nagasaki, Hiroshima, whom I met back in 1999, told me if we abolish them, we will stop the human suffering and also bring the peace. But that's back in 1999. Today, 2017, the human suffering increased. And the fear of the nuclear war is just at the fingertip. It really is. The question is, as much as we desired abolishing the nuclear bomb, the anti-March, but somehow, somewhere, our efforts are not producing. Is that because anti-something that we are against? So it took 40 long years of my struggle. I came to two things. One, my father's teaching, Takashi, greatest way to avenge your enemy is to learn to forgive. Then secondly, I learned about instead of anti, against anything, that result from the conflict of our own hearts. So why don't I shift that energy for something for? And unfortunately, nuclear bombs, just like a genie out of the bottles, we cannot put back. So question is, how can we deal with it? And that's what I'm going to say. This, how I learned was teaching my father in 1985. I met, if I use that such a way, I came to place confronting the name of Jesus Christ, the who came this world. Now, according to the gospel, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Then the book of Romans tells us, whosoever call upon the name of Jesus Christ shall be saved. So this morning as we're coming up, and J.C. Orton gave us a ride, he mentioned several times while he was driving. He said, the love neighbors as thyself. the love, love, love. And I said, that's right. We need the love. And so there I was. I came to know Christ because God said he loved so much that he gave his own son. If we are to accomplish abolition of nuclear bomb, can we not love, use the love for the source? How can we love to receive Christ as a personal Savior? That's how I was able to come to that term. Once I experienced freedom, once I experienced the divine forgiveness, then I said, wow, that's wonderful. For me, the best way to abolish the nuclear bomb, as J.C. Orton said, love, love, love. And the gentleman who sang the song, veteran gentleman, he sang and the poem. It is the love conquers all. So can we not find ourselves, experience the first? For you, I challenge you, if you have not considered, for God so loved the world, I'd like for you to consider, how can we experience that love? Energy can move forward, abolish the nuclear bomb by coming to know Christ as a personal Savior. That's how I was able to do it, and I want you to know that is the greatest way to find. And the divine forgiveness is the ground zero to shifting the whole world toward the peace. Well, I could say more, but I finish, all right? So if there's anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
I'd like to say that I'm glad to be here, but I'm not. I'm very, very sad to be here. I'm sad in part because I was asked to speak about the Marshall Islands, and we don't have Marshall Islanders standing here. Sad but true. Sad but true. Many of the people that I have worked with since 1998, intimately, since a decade even earlier, at a distance, are not with us. Average age of death in the Marshall Islands is 62. Look around. How many here are younger than 62? Right? It's quite a statement. It's quite a statement to say. So I'm sad. I'm very sad. But I'm also very happy to be here. The last time I stood before a gathering, we talked about nuclear issues and what does it mean and where are we going, was in the Marshall Islands, where we had Marshall Islands Nuclear Remembrance Day earlier this year. And it was an amazing experience. These are people who have hosted nuclear war. They can tell you inside out what nuclear war means, what the consequential damages are, because it's showing out in the first, second, third, fourth generations, and it will continue to show out for the next fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, and then beyond. When you have population-wide exposures, when you host 67 atmospheric weapons and atomizing islands and detonating balloons, lagoons, you are permanently altered, profoundly altered, and that passes along through the generations. People here at the lab, this is a very appropriate place to gather. People here at the lab have been studying, and in part, the human health effects, in part, the thorny problems of what do we do with the most contaminated place that the U.S. has ever created. What do we do with Inuitak and the Runit Dome, where the remains of many of the weapons that were tested in Inuitak Atoll were stored. Has anyone here heard of Runit Dome? Right? So when EPA was first created, one of the first tasks was how do we implement EPA, and one of the first thorny problems was what are we going to do in the Marshall Islands? It was a thorny problem because the Marshallese made it so, because of Marshallese activism and advocacy. And the solution at the time was temporary. it was too big of a problem. They figured at some point science will figure this out. And this temporary solution is still in place. It's still temporary. You have 3 to 4 inches of concrete covering Runit Dome on Inuitak, which concrete made out of radioactive reefs, out of coral, mixed with seawater, means that it's porous. Rain falls down, falls through the cracks, and underneath the dome is where much of the highly contaminated debris was dumped. That means ships, that means bunkers, that means remains of atomized soil, plants and so forth, but especially the metals, all transformed under a 3 to 4 inch cap of cement that's porous. Water filtrates down into the lagoon, into the oceans. On the beaches of China, on the coast of China, you have the Runit signature. So this has been emanating for years. And there are people here who are studying and documenting and assisting the Marshallese in trying to figure out what to do. So I want to say this because we're standing here on this day when yet another American president promises the world to rain fire and fury, unlike the world, unleashing this onto the world. We've known this before, and we know what it will do. And as we stand here with a loud force of people who say, no, no more. So I'm happy to be here to articulate what I found when I went back last March to the Marshall Islands. I did not find people who were coward, who were depressed, who are, this is hopeless. They should be what you would find, what you would expect if you've suffered so much, if the obligations by the United States are persistently denied in Congress, at the United Nations. The assistance is minuscule. The little pie chart that was shown earlier of weapons and cleanup and assistance, it's a tiny little sliver that assists the most polluted place on the planet that the United States has created. But what I found was positive, immensely positive, because we are ocean people. This is the Marshallese approach and perspective. And the challenges of nuclear war and the challenges of climate change are one and the same. The Anthropocene really started at ground zero, and the Marshallese stand as ground zero in the face of both. And they are determined to say no, not for our generations, not for the futures that come. So I'm sad and sorry that Tony de Broom, one of the key characters in the Marshallese fabric of the last 60, 70 years, truly, cannot be here to talk to you. Because if he could, if he wasn't in his hospital bed, this is where he would be to say, no, not on our watch, no. If one man can go to the United Nations, can take 9 nations of the world to the International Court of Justice, can put these issues back on the level, if one man can push the climate change treaties to the point of coordinating and coming up with a coalition of high ambition, saying, and being recognized as the person who facilitated and got that treaty signed. If those two things, the ICJ lawsuits and the climate change treaty come together, they come together in the patchwork that we need for the future. One man made a difference. One man, one woman, one child, we can all make a difference. And so the Marshallese story really has a lot to offer. Yes, you can learn a lot about the pain and the tragedy and the suffering. More importantly, you can learn a lot about where people are putting their priorities, and that individuals make a difference. Collectively, we can all make a difference. So Yokwe. Yokwe. Yokwe.
I'm a medical doctor, hence the costume. My name really isn't Bob, though. I stand with Physicians for Social Responsibility and with tens of thousands, many tens of thousands of nurses, of doctors, of healthcare professionals and public health specialists around the world, standing up to the twin existential threats that we now face. And they are nuclear war and climate disruption. And make no mistake, these two are inextricably entwined, because when you have famine and you have drought, you make nuclear conflict far more likely. To talk about nuclear weapons, I like to start with what sounds like a prayer. We've already had a bit of a prayer today, or a couple, but it's not. Primum non nocere. And you Latin scholars know that that means first, do no harm. So it's also the motto of medicine. And what do you mean in nuclear war? What does it mean not to do harm? And it means this: you do not plan to fight a nuclear war, and you do not let people believe that it is possible, because it is suicidal and it is insane. You make sure that people understand that the idea of a preemptive strike, that the idea that deterrence will not fail, that the idea that a ballistic missile, a shield of some type could work, that these are insanity. And we, people like me, within the medical profession and the public health professions, say that we renounce all nuclear strategies, save one: ban the damn bombs. And so, back to the medical paradigm again, let me talk very quickly, and I trained in New York, so I can talk pretty quickly, or Mary Leah will pull the cane. And that is this, that if you talk about the acute effects of nuclear war, and we all know what those are, but if only, we're talking about a limited nuclear war, so let's say 100 Hiroshima-sized bombs, those are small bombs nowadays, are detonated, then what would happen is that tens of millions of people around the world would die from the acute effects of heat blast and the immediate toxicity of radiation. That's more than died in World War II. When we talk about the, and then another semi or subacute effect would be that you would have, due to the soot and other debris from the explosions, you would be blocking out the sun and causing crop failures, especially grain failures around the world, the very staples that we depend upon, that the world depends upon, and a couple billion people would die within the next few years. So those are the acute, subacute effects. Let's talk about chronic effects. So I'm a cancer doctor, and of course this is a particular concern to me, because I would like to be, as a profession, extinct. Not as a species, but as a profession. When we all know that nuclear warfare is associated with the widespread dissemination, would be associated with the widespread dissemination of radionuclides, and these things have been shown to cause every type of cancer, save possibly one kind of leukemia, but every other type. And we cannot allow this to happen on a massive level. Then we have to think about what is the effect of actually having nuclear weapons. The more you have, the greater risk you're at. So, as Eric Schlosser details in his great book, 2014 book, Command and Control, that we basically have come so close to accidentally nuking our own country on multiple occasions. It has been sheer dumb luck that has prevented that from happening thus far. We've had bombs slipping out of aircraft, sliding out of submarines. I mean, they seem to be slippery little devils. We've had silos explode with not quite a detonation, but very nearly so. And this has been going on forever. Since we've had nuclear weapons, and we have we have basically then releases of radionuclides. How many people have been killed when these broken arrows and other accidents happen? Nobody knows exactly, but through cancer and through the effects of radiation, we don't know how many we've lost. The best measurements have actually been done at the nuclear labs that have shown, in fact, that employees and others have died. So the more bombs you have, The more you create, the more likely you are to kill yourself. Last thing, let's talk about money. And we've got $1 trillion allocated and more, as Marilia had indicated, for nuclear weapons within the next 30 years. That's $4 million an hour. What else might we be able to do with that kind of money? Okay, we talked about climate change, which is occurring more abruptly than has been predicted. And I think we can all recognize that. And wouldn't it be a magnificent thing if we could mobilize money and minds to get to carbon neutrality within several years, not several decades? Can anyone here imagine a peaceful Manhattan Project where, along with the renewables, wherein one actually develops safe and effective and widespread ways to draw down carbon and protect us from that?
Oh.
That could happen. Anybody here interested in a well-funded single-payer healthcare system? I sure as hell am. And so these are the things we should be spending our money on, not on weapons who can only be used to usher in the last day of civilization. So I stand before you, costumes aside, we're all doctors of destiny now, and what you do today matters, and what you say, it all matters, because we can and we must heal ourselves.
Oh.
And I thank you.
Thank you.
When I was asked to speak at today's rally, I hesitated, I'll be honest, because I have a baby who hates long drives. But what propelled me was the terrible urgency of the present crisis and the absolute necessity for those of us in the anti-nukes, anti-war, and social justice movements in the United States to mobilize en masse in this moment for peace, to push for peace. And so to that beautiful song that was sung earlier, peace, Shalom, Salam, also Pyeonghwa. Pyeonghwa is peace in Korean. Many of you who have fought for a world without nukes understand that the horror of the atomic bombings in Hiroshima, of the atomic bombings of civilian populations at Hiroshima and Nagasaki amount to a terrible stain on the American conscience. Some of you came of age during the era of the brutal American war in Vietnam, and you recall firsthand how youth and conscience-stricken people converged in protest, making that era a watershed moment in the peace movement. In more recent decades, some of you may have taken part in anti-war protests, raising your voices in the lead-up to the unconscionable war in Iraq. These have all been signature moments in the American peace movement. By contrast, North Korea, a country that knows more intimately than almost any other on this earth what it means to be in the crosshairs of the U.S. war machine, and that the United States has threatened with nuclear annihilation on multiple occasions, has hardly occasioned any organized grassroots action. North Korea doesn't weigh on the conscience of the American public, but it should. Most Americans have no sense of how intimately the crisis with North Korea is shaped by the ugly and reckless adventurism of American warmongering and the overwhelming disregard that most Americans demonstrate when the deaths of others as a result of our brutal foreign policy occurs far from our shores. North Korea comes to us in media portraits, not in its complex truth, but as a simultaneously cartoonish and demonized portrait that is filtered through a fog of war, so shrouded in jingoistic rhetoric that too many of us, not necessarily us here, but too many in this country, consent to its apocalyptic destruction in advance. When asked this past spring to ponder in real terms what it would mean if Trump were to authorize a nuclear strike against North Korea, Senator Lindsey Graham stated, Yes, it would be terrible, but the war would be over there. It wouldn't be over here. It would be bad for the Korean Peninsula. It'd be bad for China. It'd be bad for Japan. It would be bad for South Korea. It would be the end of North Korea. But what it would not do is hit America. This is the complete ignorance of someone who doesn't understand the impact of nuclear weaponry today. Yesterday, we were subjected to Trump's reckless challenge to North Korea, the most terrifying yet that we've seen from his administration. What he stated was that if North Korea continues to make threats, so in other words, speech acts, if North Korea continues to make speech acts against the United States, and he's appearing to draw a red line here, that it will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. Given that his words fall around the anniversary of the atomic apocalypse the United States visited on Japan, we are again reminded that the policymakers in Washington are afflicted with what Chalmers Johnson described as the amnesia of imperial powers. We don't recall that at the root of the present crisis is the Korean War, a brutal, dirty, and unresolved war that's never been resolved with a peace treaty. A war that's ironically known in this country for being forgotten, but that set a paradigm for subsequent U.S. wars of intervention to follow. Few in the mid-20th century during a time of McCarthyism registered opposition to the Korean War. There were exceptions. Paul Robeson was one. In a critique of what he called American armed adventure in Korea that resonates to this day, he lambasted his fellow citizens' meek conformity with the policies of the war-minded, the racists, the rich. Robeson unflinchingly observed that the maw of war makers was insatiable in Korea. Oh, Hannah, I hear you. Yeah. In an asymmetrical conflict in which the United States monopolized the skies, raining down ruin down from on high, 4 million Koreans, the vast majority civilians, were killed. Chinese statistics, and I want this to sink in, indicate that North Korea lost an unimaginable 30% of its population. Civilian infrastructure was not spared. Dams, schools, any standing structure was deemed to be fair game, and American bombers indeed complained that there was nothing left to bomb. As the historian Bruce Cummings notes, it was during this period that North Koreans, whom he describes as the party of memory, learned how to live below ground. 3 days into the war, Truman slapped a set of punitive sanctions against North Korea, and these were not an alternative to war. They were an explicit part of his war policy. North Korea, to this day, remains the most heavily sanctioned nation on this earth. Against the conditions of the 1953 Armistice Agreement, the United States maintains roughly 30,000 forces and about 100 military installations south of the DMZ. For the entirety of its existence, and I want to underscore this, North Korea has been subjected to a regime change policy from the United States. Back in the day, they called it rollback, right? And let's also remember that in keeping with the conditions of the Armistice Agreement, China withdrew its forces. Just as most Americans don't register that the United States test launched a Minuteman III ICBM from Vandenberg last week in a show of force aimed at North Korea. And although this was timed in response to the North Korean second ICBM launch, this is something that is routine. And let's recall that in terms of the proliferation of the military-industrial complex, North Korea has functioned as a very convenient ruse, even though what the United States has achieved through its anti-North Korea policy is the encirclement of China. China is nobody's fool. It knows who the real target of the United States is. So just as most Americans don't register that Minuteman III was test launched from Vandenberg, so too do most Americans not know that at mid-century, General MacArthur contemplated dropping between 30 and 50 atomic bombs strung across the neck of Manchuria in order to create a zone of cobalt where no one could live for approximately 100 years, thus making impossible a Chinese advance from the north. The United States has threatened North Korea with nuclear annihilation on at least a dozen occasions. When North Korea captured the crew of the Pueblo in the late 60s, when Colin Powell threatened to turn North Korea into a charcoal briquette, when North Korea was added to the list of permissible preemptive targets in the 2002 Nuclear Posture Review in the George W. Bush Axis of Evil era, when Obama announced that he was sending 2 stealth bombers to drop dummy nuclear munitions off the Korean peninsula in a simulated preemptive nuclear strike against North Korea, when Trump administrations repeatedly declared that all options are on the table, and when the United States, against the terms of the Armistice Agreement, housed nuclear weapons in the southern part of the peninsula. These conditions are at the structural root of North Korea's proliferation. In this time of unprecedented danger, we have to be ruthless, not in our threats, but in our pursuit of truth. Courageous, not with our swords, but in our willingness to confront our own historical denial. We have to recognize that North Korea does not require further U.S. intervention. So the question before us today is, what does a genuine peace with North Korea mean? Unsurprisingly, few media outlets have reported on North Korea's overtures to the United States. And I'll say that when it comes to North Korea, the media is truly fake news, okay? But these overtures, if pursued, might result in meaningful de-escalation on both sides. And this is to say that there are peaceful alternatives at hand. Far from being an intractable foe, North Korea has repeatedly asked the United States to sign a peace treaty that would bring the Korean War to a long overdue end. It has also proposed that the United States cease its annual war games with South Korea. And these are games that rehearse the simulated invasion and occupation of North Korea, perform the decapitation of its leadership, and also rehearse a preemptive nuclear strike. Can we imagine if the United States would put up with this and say it's business as usual if Russia and Cuba were to do this? Would they say it's not provocative? In return, and this is what North Korea also says, they have said war is not a game. Okay. In return, North Korea has offered to cap its nuclear testing. Okay, a suspension of provocative war games that are the largest in the world for a suspension of nuclear testing, thus de-escalating the current situation. China and Russia have reiterated this proposal. And so I want to say, in the middle part of the 20th century, too many Americans were silent. We cannot and we must not be silent now.
After that very informative talk on North Korea, can you hear me? Yeah. Some reassuring words from our Secretary of State from Exxon, Rex Tillerson, from Guam this morning. I think Americans should sleep well at night. Have no concerns about this particular rhetoric of the last few days. In other words, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, Oz the Magnificent. I'm old enough, and it's just possible there's some other people here who are old enough. I'm 86. How many people here are older than that? Okay. You may remember that. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I was 14 when I heard the origins of that rhetoric we heard from Trump yesterday. Fire and fury, the likes of which the world has never seen. Actually, those words are kind of a Nazi threat. They could have come from Joseph Goebbels, but actually they didn't, or Goering. I heard that when I was 14, as a few of you did, in a very straightforward Midwestern twang from our President Harry Truman, who, speaking after Hiroshima, was threatening a rain of ruin, the likes of which the world has never seen, on Japan. Interesting to know whether Trump realized here, or his speechwriter, whoever was echoing those exact words. And strictly speaking, that was, of course, a nuclear threat against, as it happens, a country that didn't have nuclear weapons. And we continued to make those threats for the next 5 years, really, against countries that didn't have any nuclear weapons until Russia acquired some. Actually, Japan had seen fire and ruin, a rain of ruin, pretty much the same as was about to come to Nagasaki on this day 72 years ago. The firebombing of Tokyo killed 80 to 120,000 people in one night, burned them to death with napalm, phosphorus, other facts, and proceeded to hit the next 67 Japanese cities in turn before Hiroshima. So they knew fire and ruin by that time. And I won't go into the whole story, but actually the atom bomb that was supposed to be the all-powerful weapon was neither necessary nor sufficient to end that war at that point. Had we not been willing to announce, or hinted, I should say, our willingness to keep the emperor, there's no reason to think that the next 10 atom bombs would have brought surrender. And on the other hand, if they had made that offer, as many U.S. officials had proposed, that we were able to keep the emperor, which we wanted to do, to rule through him, the war could have been ended well before August at that time. So this notion that the American people have lived with ever since, of this all-powerful weapon that conveys godlike power on us, has been based essentially on a hoax ever since, but not a hoax of a willingness to kill. We'd shown that already in Japan. 5 years later, in North Korea, Rosie O'Donnell dropped the bomb. General O'Donnell, who had been on the Tokyo fire raid under General LeMay, announced as head of the Pacific Air Forces in that point that we had burned to the ground every structure of mankind in North Korea. Nothing was left standing. So they know fire and ruin. But there is a new scale, and there has been for the last 72 years, not really for 72 years, more like 62 years, and let's see, since about 54, not 45. And what I'm referring to is this. Scientists who had been in on the beginning of the Manhattan Project, or even proposed it from the beginning, like Leo Szilard, who wrote the letter that Einstein sent to Roosevelt, actually, in 1939. Szilard didn't want that bomb dropped on Nagasaki, not because, or Hiroshima. He didn't even want it tested at Trinity in July, not because it would kill more people than we had already been killing. It wouldn't. Oppenheimer and the others assumed that it might kill 20,000. Well, actually, it killed more than that, but not as many as at Tokyo. There was, in fact, no decision to be made of a moral kind or a political kind by Truman. The supposed agonizing, anguishing decision they made to drop the bomb was no decision at all. We'd been killing as many Japanese civilians as we could every night for 5 months. The atom bomb was no turning point on that. But it was a turning point on something else. Szilard and the others knew that what would be coming was not only atom bombs that were 2 or 3 times as powerful as Hiroshima or Nagasaki with fission bombs, but the H-bomb, super secret, was on the way, for which the Nagasaki bomb, the plutonium implosion bomb that destroyed Nagasaki, would be the trigger, the necessary detonator for an H-bomb, of which the first droppable bomb in 1954 was 1,000 times more powerful than Nagasaki. 15 million tons of TNT equivalent compared to 15,000 tons for Hiroshima, which was compared to the roughly 15 tons of the largest blockbusters in World War II, called blockbusters because they destroyed about a city block with 15 or 20 tons of TNT. Hiroshima, 15,000. Castle Bravo test in 1954, 15 million. That was coming. So those of you, and we've all seen the pictures of Nagasaki, or even more of Hiroshima after the bomb, are seeing a picture of a city that looks very much like Tokyo, after the night of March 4th, 5th, 1945, 5 months later, pretty much the same. Victims the same, crimes the same. But Nagasaki city, you're seeing what happens to a city when we drop the trigger to a modern thermonuclear weapon, the detonator, the detonating cap. That's what you're seeing. So it's a totally different level of fire and fury in terms of scale, and in terms of the fallout, in terms of the nuclear winter and everything else. Now, some of you, I'm very happy to see there are people here who were with me at Rocky Flats Nuclear Weapons Production Facility, where they made all the plutonium triggers for our H-bombs. And keep in mind, at one point we had 37,000 nuclear weapons, most of them H-bombs. Now we have about 10,000 on the shelf, several thousand alert, hair trigger, about 4,000 operational, supposedly, of these bombs, which are, as they say, many times that of Hiroshima, with the triggers, nearly all of the current ones, made at Rocky Flats. And by the way, Rocky Flats eventually was closed down for its pollution of the countryside forever, essentially, by a runaway grand jury that got the FBI to go in and raid it and discover what was coming on. At Nagasaki Day, 39 years ago, 1978, Nagasaki Day, we were sitting on the tracks and we were shutting it down at the entrance. And people asked then, why are you doing this? You know, you don't stop. They'd ask that on the tracks. You know, you stop the arms track for a day, let's say, but you know, that doesn't stop their making the bombs and so forth. And the message was that a few of us cannot stop it, cannot stop the arms race, but the American people as a whole can and must do that. And that's what we're demanding. The threats that Trump was making the other day, the words and the music was a little different, but the sense is the same, has been the same for 70 years. First-use nuclear threats by every president we've had since Harry Truman. And in the last election, we had Trump saying, yes, I wouldn't take it off the table, but he was just echoing what Bush had said before him, and Obama, and Edwards, and all the other, and all the Republicans that all say, not off the table, never off the table. The truth is, the American people need to tell this president and Congress and the media, the U.S. has no nuclear first-use option on the table. That is not an option. That is a crime against humanity. It is a preparation, a rehearsal for the destruction of life on Earth. There is no first-use option. And when it comes to just making the weapons, I'm sure there are people who there today who will see us sitting there or getting arrested, whatever, who are working there and thinking, why? We're doing deterrence here. What's the problem here? You know, we're patriots and so forth. And the answer has to be the same as at Rocky Flats. When they asked me 39 years ago on this day, why are you doing this? And that we said, there shouldn't be business as usual designing weapons, plutonium-type weapons of the kind that destroyed Nagasaki and are now triggers, on Nagasaki Day without having to arrest Americans to do it. You're going to do it over our bodies on this day, and that's what we're saying today. Thank you for being here.
We believe in peace. We believe in peace. We believe in peace. We believe in peace. Salam shalom. Peace, salam shalom. Peace, salam shalom. Peace, salam shalom.